In the 1920s, French pilots flew over the flooded plains of southern Vietnam and took photographs of the ground below. And in those photographs, they saw something that should not have been there. Long, dead straight lines, running for tens of kilometers across the swamp. Rivers do not run straight. These were canals. And they were nearly 2,000 years old. When archaeologists began to dig where the lines met, they found a buried city. And in the mud, they found the gold of the entire ancient world. A Roman gold medallion, stamped with the face of an emperor. A Chinese bronze mirror. A statue of an Indian god. Glass beads from Persia. All in one place. This was the port of a kingdom that traded with Rome, India, and China at the same time, the first great empire of Southeast Asia. It grew rich beyond anything we had imagined for this corner of the world. And then it vanished. It vanished so completely that for over 1,000 years, no one knew it had ever existed. We call it Funan. But that is not its name. That is only the name that strangers gave it. Its real name is one of the things it took with it into the mud. To find Funan, you have to go to the place where the Mekong River finally reaches the sea. Here, the great river breaks apart into a maze of channels and wetlands, dropping the rich silt it has carried for thousands of kilometers. It is land that is half water, fertile, flat, and threaded with rivers that lead straight out into the trade routes of the eastern seas. Around 2,000 years ago, in the first century of our era, a kingdom rose out of this delta. And here is the first strange thing about it. We have almost nothing written by the people of Funan themselves. Almost everything we know comes from the records of foreigners, and above all, from the Chinese. In the 3rd century, 2 Chinese envoys, named King Tai and Zhu Ying, traveled to this kingdom and wrote down what they saw. It was they who wrote the name down in Chinese characters as Funan. And that name stuck for 2,000 years. But the word Funan appears in no local text anywhere. It is a Chinese spelling of a word in a language we have lost. Many scholars think it echoes an old word for mountain, that these were the kings of the mountain. But the truth is, we do not know what the people of Funan called their own country. What we do have is their founding legend. And it begins, like the kingdom itself, with the sea. The story tells of a man named Antoninus, a Brahmin, a trader, who came across the ocean from the west, from the world of India. His ship was met by the local ruler, a warrior queen named Soma, the daughter of the king of the water serpents, the Nagas. She came to raid him. They fought. And then, instead, they married. The foreign sailor and the serpent princess. And from their union, the line of Funan's kings was born, passed down, the legend says, through her. For a long time, that was just a myth. But recently, DNA from an early Funan grave near the old capital revealed something startling. The person buried there carried a large share of South Asian ancestry. The marriage of the sailor and the local princess was not only a story. It was written in their blood. This was the first kingdom in Southeast Asia to take on the gods, the writing, and the courtly style of India, while keeping its own Delta soul. It was the distant ancestor of the civilization that would one day build Angkor. But Funan's real power did not come from its kings, or its gods. It came from where it sat on the map. In the first centuries of our era, a single great sea route was forming, linking the Mediterranean to China. Ships rode the monsoon winds from India and Persia toward the east, and Funan sat right in the middle of the journey. To get from the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, traders had to come through these waters. Funan was the gateway. And at the heart of it stood the port city we now call Oc Ao, in what is today An Giang province in Vietnam. It was a city built on water, laced with canals, lined with workshops, warehouses, and the homes of goldsmiths and merchants. The Funanese cut a network of canals more than 200 kilometers long, linking the port to their inland capital at Angkor Boré, and out to the sea. These canals moved cargo, and they watered the rice that fed the kingdom. It was a landscape engineered on a scale no one in the region had attempted before. And through that port came the goods of the entire known world. When archaeologists dug into Oc Ao, they pulled the planet out of a single layer of earth. Gold medallions struck in the Roman Empire, in the reign of the Emperor Antoninus Pius, and perhaps his successor, Marcus Aurelius. Bronze mirrors from Han China. Carved statues of Hindu gods from India. Glass beads and ornaments from Persia. Tin, lead, and gold worked by local craftsmen into jewelry, beads, and thin stamped sheets of decorated metal. Think about what that means. A coin minted near Rome, carried halfway around the planet, and buried in the mud of the Mekong Delta. This was not a backwater. This was one of the busiest harbors on Earth. There is even a clue from the other end of the world. Around the year 150, the Roman geographer Ptolemy drew a map of everything Rome knew. At its far eastern edge, beyond India, he marked a port, the last harbor of the known world. He called it Ka-Tigara. Many scholars believe that Ka-Tigara was Okao, that this delta port was the easternmost place the Roman world had ever heard of. Others are not so sure, and the debate is still open. But whatever its name on a Roman map, Funan was rich. And under one king, it became something close to an empire. In the 3rd century, a ruler the Chinese called Fan Sherman built a great fleet of ships. With it, he attacked and subdued more than 10 neighboring kingdoms, reaching down the Malay Peninsula and toward Burma, the great king of Funan. At its height, on the docks of this delta city, a sailor from Rome and a merchant from China might have stood side by side, 1800 years ago, in a kingdom whose name we can no longer read. But the very thing that made Funan rich carried the seed of its downfall. Funan's wealth rested on a single fact of geography. It was a place where ships had to stop. Cargo coming from the west was unloaded, carried across Funan's land and canals, and loaded onto fresh ships heading east, and the other way around. Every cargo that passed through paid for the privilege. Funan was the toll gate of the eastern seas. But a toll gate only works if there is no way around it. Over the centuries, sailors grew bolder and their ships grew better. They learned to read the monsoon more precisely. And slowly, they found they no longer had to stop. They could sail straight through the straits to the south, all the way from the Indian Ocean to China, without ever calling at Funan. The world had found a way around the toll gate. The ships that had once crowded the canals of Okao began to thin. The warehouses saw fewer cargoes. The river of wealth slowed to a trickle. The advantage that had built the empire had quietly become its weakness. And as the coast grew poorer, power began to shift inland, away from the sea. To the north lay a vassal, a people the Chinese called Chenla, in the lands of inland Cambodia and southern Laos. 4 generations, Chenla had answered to Funan. Now Funan was fading, and Chenla was rising. Funan was not destroyed by some great enemy in a single battle. It died because the world simply learned to sail past it. In the middle of the 6th century, the vassal turned on its master. A king of Chenla named Bievieverman rose up, refused to bow any longer, and seized the heartland of Funan. Funan's rulers fled south, clinging to the coast, trying to hold on to what remained. But the end had begun. Over the following decades, Chenla pressed on. By around the year 627, a Chenla king named Asenaverman had absorbed the last of Funan entirely. It was not, in truth, a sudden collapse. The people did not all vanish. The canals, the rice fields, the towns carried on, passing from Funan into Chenla and, in time, toward Angkor. But the kingdom called Funan, the great port empire of the Delta, was finished. And without the trade that had given it life, its capital city began to die. The canals that were not maintained silted up. The harbor that no longer received ships filled slowly with mud. The Delta is a patient thing. Year after year, the river laid down its silt. Grass grew over the wharves. Rice paddies spread across the streets. The workshops, the temples, the warehouses sank back into the wet earth they had been built upon. And the name itself began to fade. The language of Funan dissolved into the tongues that came after it. The kingdom that had linked Rome to China slipped out of memory so quietly that no one was left to mourn it. For more than 1,000 years, the first empire of Southeast Asia was nothing but swamp, and rice, and a few odd straight lines in the land that no one could explain. And that is where it stayed, until the arrival of the airplane. When those French pilots photographed the Delta from above in the early 20th century, the straight lines finally made sense again. From the ground, they were invisible, just shallow ditches in the paddies. From the air, they were unmistakable. A vast, deliberate network, drawn by human hands. In the 1940s, a French archaeologist named Louis Milleray followed the lines to their center, and began to excavate the buried city of Okao. What he found rewrote the early history of the entire region. The Roman gold, the Chinese mirrors, the Indian gods, the Persian glass. Here was hard proof that 2,000 years ago, this delta had been plugged into a trade network that stretched all the way to the Mediterranean. The picture is not perfect. Some of the Roman coins were bought from local people, not dug from the ground, and scholars still argue over exactly how they arrived. But the sheer mix of treasures, Indian, Chinese, Persian, Mediterranean, all together in one delta port, leaves no doubt about what Ok Ao once was. Today, Vietnamese archaeologists are still working the site of Ok Ao and the hill of Ba Tay, and the whole landscape is being put forward for World Heritage status. We have matched the kingdom in the ground to the Chinese records, to Ptolemy's map, to the legend of the Serpent Queen. We can hold its gold. We can stand on its canals, some of which farmers still use to this day. We know that it was the first great kingdom of Southeast Asia, and the seed from which the world of Angkor would grow. And yet, for all of that, the most basic thing of all is still missing. We do not know what the people of Funan called their own kingdom. We do not know what language they prayed in. The richest port in the early Eastern world kept its own name a secret, all the way to the end. The canals are still there. You can see them from the sky, running straight across the green delta, exactly as they did 2,000 years ago, now edged with rice. And in a museum case, a Roman gold coin still shows the face of an emperor, resting, at last, half a world away from the city where it was struck. Funan was rich enough to trade with Rome, and skilled enough to carve a delta into a map of canals. But of all the things it left behind in the mud, the gold, the gods, the dead straight lines in the earth, the one thing it kept was its name. And that has sunk deeper than any canal we will ever dredge. In the next video, we follow the Silk Road north, off the sea and into the desert, to a people who buried their cities in salt, and then vanished, leaving behind perfectly preserved mummies with red and golden hair that no one can fully explain. That's the story of Lulan. Subscribe so you don't miss it.